The smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen as I placed a steaming mug in front of Sarah. She was already dressed in her tennis outfit, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Saturdays had always been her tennis days, a hobby she picked up 5 years ago. But recently she'd been training more intensely, going every day. She said she wanted to become a tennis champion, and I believed her, admiring her dedication. "Ready for your training?" I asked, taking a sip from my own mug. Sarah smiled, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Absolutely. Coach says I'm improving a lot. I just need to keep pushing myself." I nodded, feeling a mix of pride and a slight twinge of annoyance. Our weekends had always been sacred, but now they were dominated by her tennis schedule. I missed our lazy Saturdays, our spontaneous trips, but I kept these feelings to myself, not wanting to dampen her enthusiasm. She kissed me on the cheek, her touch brief and mechanical. "See you later, love. Wish me luck." "Good luck," I said, watching her leave. As the door closed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I dismissed it, chalking it up to my own insecurities. I spent the day doing chores around the house, trying to keep myself busy. As the hours passed, my mind wandered to Sarah. I wondered how she was doing, if she was truly as happy as she seemed. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of my phone buzzing. It was a text from my friend Mark, asking if I wanted to grab a beer later. I agreed, eager for the distraction. That evening, Mark and I sat at our usual spot at the local bar. The atmosphere was lively, filled with the chatter of people unwinding after a long week. We clinked our glasses together, the cold beer a welcome relief. "So how's Sarah's training going?" Mark asked, taking a swig from his bottle. "Good, I guess. She's really committed," I replied, trying to sound more enthusiastic than I felt. Mark raised an eyebrow. "You guess? What's up, man?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know. It's just... she's been so focused on tennis lately. It's like we barely spend any time together anymore." He nodded, his expression sympathetic. "I get it. But hey, it's just a phase. She'll find a balance eventually." "I hope so," I said, though doubt lingered in my mind. As the weeks passed, Sarah's routine remained the same. Every day she would head off to the tennis court, returning late in the evening, exhausted but happy. I tried to be supportive, reminding myself that this was her passion. But the distance between us grew, an invisible barrier that neither of us acknowledged. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, I decided to broach the subject. "Sarah, do you think we could maybe take a break from tennis this weekend? Just for a day?" She looked at me, surprised. "Why? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong. I just miss spending time with you, that's all." Her expression softened, and she reached across the table to hold my hand. "I miss you too. But this is important to me. I need to give it my all if I want to succeed. I understand that, I really do. But can we at least find some time for us? Even if it's just a few hours?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, I'll talk to my coach. Maybe we can arrange something." Relief washed over me, and I squeezed her hand. "Thank you." The next day, Sarah left for her usual training session, promising to be home earlier. I spent the day planning a surprise date, eager to rekindle the spark between us. As evening approached, I set up a candlelit dinner in the backyard, complete with fairy lights and her favorite wine. When she walked through the door, her eyes widened in delight. "Oh my gosh, this is amazing!" I grinned, feeling a surge of happiness. I wanted to do something special for us. We spent the evening talking and laughing, reminiscing about old memories. For the first time in weeks, it felt like we were truly connected again. But as the night wore on, a sense of unease crept in. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of guilt that I couldn't quite place. As we cleaned up, she received a text message. She glanced at her phone, and her expression changed, a mix of surprise and apprehension. "I need to take this," she said, stepping away. I watched her go, a knot forming in my stomach. Something was definitely wrong. But I pushed the thought aside, convincing myself that it was just my imagination. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The first crack in the foundation of our marriage, a prelude to the storm that was about to come. The days that followed our backyard dinner were a confusing mix of closeness and distance. Sarah kept her promise to spend more time with me, but her phone was always nearby, buzzing with messages that she quickly dismissed. I tried not to let it bother me, but each time she glanced at her screen with that same flicker of guilt, it gnawed at my mind. One evening, as she prepared to leave for her usual tennis session, I couldn't help but ask, "Who's been texting you so much lately?" She paused, her hand hovering over her tennis bag. "Oh, it's just some friends from the tennis club. Coordinating practice times and stuff." "Every day?" I pressed, trying to keep my tone light. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, we're all really committed. It's a good support system." I nodded, forcing myself to accept her explanation. "Okay, have a good practice." As she left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The nagging doubt stayed with me all evening, growing stronger with each passing hour. When she returned home late that night, exhausted and drenched in sweat, I decided to drop the subject for now. Pushing her too hard might only drive her further away. Over the next week, I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from my growing suspicions. But even at the office, my mind kept wandering back to Sarah. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would skip a beat, only to sink when it was just a work email or a message from Mark. One Friday evening, Mark and I decided to meet up again. We sat in our usual corner at the bar, nursing our drinks. I recounted the past few weeks, my concerns spilling out like a dam that had finally burst. "Do you think I'm being paranoid?" I asked, staring into my glass. Mark shook his head. "No, man. I think you have every right to be worried. But you need to be sure before you do anything drastic." "I know," I said, sighing. "I just don't know how to find out without confronting her directly." Mark took a thoughtful sip of his beer. "Maybe you should check her phone." I looked at him, shocked. "I can't do that. It's a huge invasion of privacy." He shrugged. "I get that. But if something's really going on, you need to know." The idea lingered in my mind, battling with my sense of morality. That night, as Sarah slept beside me, I lay awake, torn between my need for answers and my respect for her privacy. In the end, I decided against it. I would find another way. The following Saturday, Sarah left early for tennis, as usual. I decided to swing by the tennis club later, under the guise of surprising her. I hoped seeing her in her element, happy and focused, would ease my doubts. I arrived at the club around noon. The courts were busy, filled with the sound of tennis balls thudding against rackets and players calling out scores. I wandered around, searching for Sarah. Finally, I spotted her on the far court, playing a doubles match. She looked intense and determined, her movements graceful and powerful. Relief washed over me as I watched her. She was just passionate about her sport, nothing more. I was about to leave when I noticed her glancing at the stands. My eyes followed her gaze to a man sitting alone, watching her intently. He was tall, with dark hair and an athletic build. He smiled and waved, and Sarah smiled back, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. A pang of jealousy stabbed at my chest. Who was this guy? Was he the reason for all those secretive texts? I felt my hands clench into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. Jumping to conclusions wouldn't help. When the match ended, Sarah and her partner walked over to the stands. The man stood up, clapping enthusiastically. He greeted Sarah with a hug, and they started talking animatedly. I moved closer, trying to catch their conversation without being noticed. "Great game, Sarah. You're really improving," the man said, his voice warm and familiar. "Thanks, Karl," she replied, her tone affectionate. "Couldn't have done it without your tips." Karl. The name echoed in my mind, matching the one from the text message I had seen. My stomach churned, a mix of anger and betrayal swirling inside me. I stepped back, trying to process what I had just witnessed. Part of me wanted to confront them right then and there, but I held back. I needed more information before making any accusations. That night, as Sarah and I sat down for dinner, I tried to act normal, but the image of her with Karl kept flashing in my mind, fueling my suspicions. I watched her closely, looking for any signs of deceit, but she seemed as cheerful and loving as ever. "How was tennis today?" I asked, my voice steady. "It was good. We had a doubles match and won," she replied, smiling. "How was your day?" "Busy, but not too bad," I said, forcing a smile. We continued our small talk, but my mind was elsewhere. I needed to know the truth, but I didn't want to destroy our marriage on a hunch. I decided to follow her the next day, to see if there was more to her relationship with Karl than just tennis. Sunday morning came, and Sarah left for the tennis club again. I waited a few minutes before grabbing my keys and following her. My heart pounded in my chest as I drove, the fear of what I might discover gnawing at me. When I arrived at the club, I parked a little distance away and walked over. I spotted Sarah's car and waited, my eyes scanning the area. After a few minutes, she emerged from the building, not in her tennis gear but dressed casually. She got into her car and drove off, and I followed at a safe distance. She didn't go to the tennis courts. Instead, she drove to a quiet, upscale neighborhood. I parked a few houses down and watched as she pulled into a driveway and got out. My heart sank as I saw Karl step out of the house to greet her. They embraced, and she kissed him on the cheek before they went inside. I sat there, stunned, the reality of her betrayal crashing down on me. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted, was cheating on me. The anger and hurt I had tried to suppress erupted, but I knew I needed to stay calm. I needed a plan. I drove home, my mind racing. The next steps were crucial. Confronting her now would only lead to a heated argument without resolving anything. I needed to gather more evidence, to be sure of what I was dealing with. That evening, Sarah returned home, acting as if nothing had happened. I played along, masking my turmoil with a facade of normalcy. But inside, I was already plotting my next move, determined to uncover the full extent of her betrayal. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of dread and determination. Sarah was already up, preparing for another day of tennis training. As she moved around the kitchen, humming softly, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. The woman I had loved for so long was now a stranger, someone I no longer trusted. "Morning," she said cheerfully, handing me a cup of coffee. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile. "Got any big plans for today?" "Just the usual. Practice, maybe a quick lunch with some of the girls from the club," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I nodded, my heart heavy with the knowledge that she was lying. "Sounds good. I'll be working late tonight, so don't wait up for me." "Okay, love. Have a great day," she said, kissing me on the cheek before heading out the door. As soon as she left, I grabbed my phone and called Mark. I needed his support, and more importantly, I needed his help. "Hey man, can you meet me at the bar in an hour?" I asked, my voice tense. "Sure. Everything okay?" he replied, concern evident in his tone. "Not really. I'll explain when I see you," I said before hanging up. An hour later, I was sitting in our usual spot, nursing a beer. Mark arrived, his expression a mix of worry and curiosity. "What's going on?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from me. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my words. "I think Sarah is cheating on me." His eyes widened in shock. "What? Are you sure?" I nodded, recounting everything I had seen and heard over the past few weeks. When I finished, Mark looked grim. "That's rough, man. What do you want to do?" "I need to catch her in the act. I need proof," I said, my voice filled with resolve. Mark nodded. "Okay, what's the plan?" We spent the next hour devising a strategy. I would follow Sarah again, this time with Mark's help. We would document everything, gathering the evidence I needed. It felt wrong, spying on my own wife, but I needed to know the truth. The next day, Sarah left for her training as usual. Mark and I followed her, keeping a safe distance. She drove to Karl's house again, and this time, I had a camera ready. We watched as she entered the house, her demeanor casual and familiar. For the next few hours, we waited. My mind raced with thoughts of what was happening inside, the betrayal stinging deeper with each passing minute. Finally, Sarah and Karl emerged, laughing and holding hands. I snapped several photos, each one a dagger to my heart. "Let's go," I said, my voice tight with emotion. We drove back to my house, the silence between us heavy. When we arrived, I thanked Mark for his help and went inside. I spent the rest of the day staring at the photos, my mind reeling. The proof was undeniable. Sarah was cheating on me. That evening, Sarah came home, her mood cheerful. She greeted me with a smile, but I could barely look at her. "Hey, how was your day?" she asked, oblivious to my turmoil. "Busy," I replied, my voice cold. She frowned, sensing something was wrong. "Is everything okay?" I wanted to confront her then and there, to unleash my anger and hurt. But I knew it wasn't the right time. I needed to be calm, to plan my next move carefully. "Just tired," I said, forcing a smile. I'm going to bed early. Okay, she said, her concern evident. I love you. I mumbled a response and headed upstairs, leaving her standing in the kitchen, confused and worried. Once in our bedroom, I locked the door and sat on the bed, the weight of my discovery pressing down on me. The next morning, I woke up with a clear plan. I would follow Sarah to the tennis court, where she claimed to be training. I needed to see if there was any truth to her story or if it was all just a cover for her affair with Karl. I waited until she left, then grabbed my keys and followed her. She drove to the tennis club, just as she had said. I parked nearby and watched as she greeted her coach and began her practice. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe she was truly committed to her training. But then, Karl arrived. He stayed on the sidelines, watching her intently. During a break, they talked and laughed, their interaction too familiar, too intimate. My heart sank. It was clear that their relationship went beyond just tennis. I stayed for the rest of her practice, documenting everything. When it was over, she left with Karl, and I followed them to a nearby cafe. They sat together, talking and laughing, their body language speaking volumes. I took more photos, each one a painful confirmation of her betrayal. When I returned home, I felt numb. The evidence was irrefutable. Sarah was cheating on me, and there was no denying it any longer. I needed to confront her, to make her face the truth. That evening, Sarah came home, her mood as bright as ever. I watched her, my anger and hurt simmering just beneath the surface. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but cold. She looked at me, startled. "What's wrong?" "I know about you and Karl," I said, my eyes boring into hers. Her face went pale, and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "I've seen the texts, the photos. I've followed you," I continued, my voice rising. "How could you do this to me? To us?" Tears filled her eyes, and she finally found her voice. "Tom, I'm so sorry." "Sorry. Sorry doesn't even begin to cover it," I said, my anger boiling over. "I trusted you, Sarah. I loved you. And you betrayed me." She reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away. "Please, Tom, let me explain." I shook my head. "No. There's nothing you can say that will change what you've done." I turned and walked out of the house, leaving her standing there, sobbing. I needed time to think, to process everything. I needed to decide what to do next. I drove aimlessly through the city, my mind a whirlpool of emotions. Anger, hurt, betrayal, all churned inside me, making it hard to think clearly. The memory of Sarah's tear-filled eyes haunted me, but I couldn't let her tears soften my resolve. She had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and there was no coming back from that. Eventually, I found myself at the park where Sarah and I had spent so many happy afternoons. The sight of the familiar place only deepened my pain. I parked the car and walked to our favorite bench, memories flooding back with each step. As I sat down, I buried my face in my hands, struggling to hold back the tears. I stayed there for hours, lost in thought. By the time I returned home, it was late, and the house was dark. I hoped Sarah had gone to bed, but as I walked through the door, I found her sitting on the couch, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Tom," she said softly, standing up as I entered. I ignored her and headed towards the stairs. "Please, can we talk?" she pleaded, following me. I stopped and turned to face her, my anger flaring up again. "Talk? Now you want to talk? After everything?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I need to explain. Please." I sighed, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "Fine, talk." She took a deep breath, struggling to compose herself. "I didn't mean for this to happen. It started innocently. Karl was just a friend from the tennis club. We got close because of our shared passion for tennis. But somewhere along the way, things changed." "Changed?" I spat. "You mean you decided to start sleeping with him?" She winced, my words cutting deep. "Yes, but it wasn't just about sex. I was feeling neglected, and he was there for me." "Neglected? So it's my fault now?" I said, my voice rising. "You could have talked to me, Sarah. Instead, you chose to cheat." "I know. I was wrong. I was selfish and stupid," she said, sobbing. "But I still love you, Tom. It didn't mean anything." I shook my head, my heart breaking all over again. It meant everything, Sarah. You shattered my trust. How can I ever believe you again? She reached out, her hand trembling. Please, give me a chance to make it right. I stared at her, torn between my love for her and the pain of her betrayal. Finally, I shook my head. I need time. I need space. I can't do this right now. Without another word, I turned and walked up the stairs, leaving her crying in the hallway. In our bedroom, I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Could our marriage be salvaged? Did I even want to try? The next few days were a blur. I avoided Sarah as much as possible, leaving early for work and coming home late. At night, I slept in the guest room, unable to bear the thought of sharing a bed with her. Each time I saw her, the pain and anger resurfaced, and I knew I needed more time to process everything. Mark called me several times, checking in and offering his support. He was my rock during this turbulent time, always ready to listen and provide advice. One evening, he suggested we meet up for a drink, and I eagerly agreed, desperate for a distraction. We met at our usual spot, and after a few beers, I found myself pouring out my heart to him. I don't know what to do, Mark. I love her, but I don't know if I can ever trust her again, I said, my voice cracking. He nodded sympathetically. That's a tough spot to be in, man. Trust is everything in a relationship. Without it, it's hard to move forward. I keep replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out where it all went wrong, I continued, frustration evident in my tone. Sometimes there's no clear answer. People make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes are unforgivable, Mark said, his expression serious. I just wish I knew if she was truly sorry or if she would do it again, I said, my mind filled with doubt. Only time will tell. But you need to take care of yourself first. Don't rush into any decisions. Give yourself the space to heal, he advised. I nodded, grateful for his words of wisdom. Thanks, Mark. I don't know what I'd do without you. Anytime, man. Just know that whatever you decide, I'll be here to support you, he said, clinking his glass against mine. When I returned home that night, Sarah was waiting for me, her eyes filled with hope and fear. Tom, can we talk? I hesitated, then nodded. Okay. We sat down in the living room, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. I have been thinking a lot about what you said, she began, her voice trembling. And I realize now how much I've hurt you. I want to make things right, but I know it won't be easy. Trust takes years to build and seconds to break, I said, my voice cold. How can I believe anything you say? I'll do whatever it takes to prove myself to you. Therapy, counseling, whatever you want, she said earnestly. Do you even want this marriage anymore? I asked, my eyes searching hers for any sign of deceit. Yes, more than anything. I know I've made a terrible mistake, but I love you, Tom. I don't want to lose you, she said, tears streaming down her face. I sighed, feeling the weight of her words. I need time to think. I can't make any decisions right now. She nodded, her expression a mix of relief and sadness. I understand. Take all the time you need. As I lay in the guest room that night, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for us. But the road to forgiveness and healing would be long and arduous, and I wasn't sure if either of us was strong enough to make it. The days following our conversation were tense, filled with an uneasy truce. Sarah and I moved around each other carefully, avoiding any confrontation while trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. She continued with her tennis, though I noticed she stopped seeing Karl entirely. Whether it was out of guilt or a genuine attempt to rebuild trust, I wasn't sure, but I appreciated the effort, however small it might be. One evening, as we sat down for a quiet dinner, Sarah broached the subject that had been hanging over us. Tom, have you thought about counseling? I think it could help us. I looked at her, the hope in her eyes almost painful to see. I've thought about it. I'm willing to try, but I can't promise anything. That's all I ask, she said softly, her relief palpable. We found a marriage counselor recommended by a friend. Dr. Laura Spencer was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. Our first session was nerve-wracking, both of us unsure of what to expect. But as the hour progressed, I found myself opening up, the floodgates of my emotions finally releasing. Why didn't you come to me? I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and sadness. Why turn to him instead of talking to me? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I felt like you weren't there for me, Tom. You were always so busy with work and I felt neglected. But I know now that I should have talked to you, I should have tried harder. Dr. Spencer listened quietly, occasionally interjecting with a question or comment. It's clear that there's a lot of hurt and betrayal here, but it's also clear that there's still a lot of love. The key is to rebuild trust, which will take time and effort from both of you. Over the next few weeks, we continued our sessions, slowly unpacking the layers of our relationship. It wasn't easy. There were moments of intense anger, painful admissions, and tears. But there were also moments of connection, small glimmers of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. At home, things were still strained, but there were signs of improvement. We started having dinner together again, talking about our days, and even sharing a few laughs. It was tentative, fragile, but it was something. One Saturday, Sarah suggested we play tennis together, something we hadn't done in years. I hesitated, the memories of her betrayal still fresh, but I agreed. We drove to the tennis club, the familiar setting both comforting and unsettling. As we hit the ball back and forth, the rhythm of the game helped ease the tension between us. For a while, it felt like old times, just the two of us enjoying each other's company. But every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of Karl out of the corner of my eye, his presence haunting me like a ghost. After the game, we sat on the bench, catching our breath. Sarah looked at me, her expression earnest. I know things will never be the same, but I want you to know that I'm committed to making this work. I love you, Tom, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I nodded, my heart heavy with conflicting emotions. I want to believe you, Sarah. I really do. But it's going to take time. I understand, she said, reaching out to hold my hand. Thank you for giving us a chance. As the weeks turned into months, we continued to navigate the rocky path of reconciliation. There were setbacks, moments of doubt and anger, but there were also moments of genuine connection and hope. Dr. Spencer helped us build new ways of communicating, encouraging us to be honest and open with each other. One evening, after a particularly good session, Sarah and I went out for dinner. It felt almost like a date, a chance to rediscover each other outside the confines of therapy. We talked about our future, our hopes and fears, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of optimism. As we walked back to the car, Sarah stopped and looked at me, her eyes filled with emotion. Tom, I know I've hurt you deeply, and I don't expect forgiveness overnight. But I promise you, I'm doing everything I can to make things right. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. I know you are, and I'm trying too. It's hard. She nodded, her grip on my hand tightening. I understand, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Back at home, as we settled into bed, I felt a sense of peace that had been absent for so long. It was a small step, but it was a step forward, and for the first time, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what was broken. The next morning, I woke up to find Sarah already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, her face thoughtful. Morning, I said, sitting up. Morning, she replied, her voice soft. I've been thinking. Maybe we should take a trip, just the two of us. Get away from everything and try to reconnect. A trip? I asked, surprised. Yeah, it doesn't have to be anything big. Just a weekend somewhere quiet where we can focus on us, she suggested. I considered her proposal, the idea appealing despite my lingering doubts. Okay, let's do it. We decided on a small cabin by the lake, a place we'd visited years ago and loved. The drive there was filled with a mix of nostalgia and apprehension, both of us wondering if this trip would help or hurt our fragile progress. When we arrived, the sight of the familiar cabin brought back a flood of memories. We unpacked and spent the first day exploring the area, hiking through the woods and relaxing by the lake. The tranquility of the place helped ease some of the tension, allowing us to talk and laugh more freely. That evening, we sat by the fireplace, the crackling of the logs filling the silence. Sarah looked at me, her expression serious. Tom, there's something I need to tell you. My heart skipped a beat, fearing the worst. What is it? She took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with tears. I have been seeing a therapist on my own too. I wanted to understand why I did what I did, and how I can be a better person for you. For us. I was taken aback, not expecting this revelation. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want to add more pressure or make you feel like you had to forgive me. This is something I needed to do for myself, to make sure I never make the same mistake again, she explained. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. I'm glad you're doing that. It means a lot. We sat in silence for a while, the fire casting a warm glow on her face. For the first time, I felt a genuine connection, a sense of understanding that had been missing for so long. Let's make a promise, I said, breaking the silence, to always be honest with each other, no matter how hard it is. She smiled, her eyes filled with hope. I promise. Me too, I replied, taking her hand. As we sat there, I realized that the road to healing would be long and difficult, but we were finally on the right path. The trust that had been shattered was slowly being rebuilt, one step at a time. Returning from our weekend getaway, I felt a renewed sense of hope. The trip had given us a much-needed break from the daily reminders of our broken trust, and for the first time in months, I felt like we were making real progress. But as life resumed its usual rhythm, the challenges of rebuilding our relationship became more apparent. Our sessions with Dr. Spencer continued to be a cornerstone of our efforts. She guided us through difficult conversations and helped us develop new ways of communicating. But despite our progress, the lingering doubts and insecurities remained, a constant shadow over our attempts to move forward. One evening, after a particularly intense session, Sarah and I sat in the car, the silence between us heavy with unresolved emotions. Tom, do you think we'll ever truly get past this? Sarah asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. I looked at her, my heart aching at the pain in her eyes. I don't know, Sarah, but I do know that I'm willing to keep trying, as long as you are. She nodded, tears welling up. I am. I just hate that I hurt you so much. We both have to learn to forgive, I said softly. You have to forgive yourself, and I have to find a way to forgive you. As the weeks turned into months, we slowly began to rebuild our lives. We found a new normal, one that included both the scars of the past and the hope for the future. Sarah continued to focus on her tennis, but she made a conscious effort to include me, inviting me to her matches and even suggesting we play together more often. One Saturday, she had a big match at the club. It was a doubles tournament, and she was excited but nervous. I decided to surprise her by showing up to watch. As I entered the club, I spotted her on the court, her face set in determination. She played with a grace and intensity that was mesmerizing, and for a moment, I felt a surge of pride and love. After the match, which she won, I approached her. Her face lit up with surprise and happiness when she saw me. Tom, you came! She exclaimed, throwing her arms around me. Of course, I wouldn't miss it, I said, hugging her tightly. As we walked to the car, she looked at me, her eyes shining. Thank you for being here. It means a lot. You're welcome, I replied, feeling a warmth that had been absent for too long. But the peace we had found was fragile. One evening, while we were having dinner, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message. She glanced at it, her expression unreadable. Who is it? I asked, unable to keep the suspicion out of my voice. It's just a reminder for my tennis practice tomorrow, she said, putting her phone down. I nodded, trying to push away the doubts that resurfaced. Trust was a delicate thing, and every little reminder of the past betrayal threatened to undo the progress we had made. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. I turned to Sarah, needing to voice my concerns. Sarah, I need to ask you something, I said, my heart pounding. Of course. What is it? She replied, turning to face me. Is there anything else you're not telling me? Anything at all? I asked, my voice trembling. She looked at me, her eyes filled with sadness. Tom, I promise you, there's nothing else. I know I've broken your trust, but I swear, I'm not hiding anything. I studied her face, searching for any sign of deceit, but all I saw was the woman I loved, trying her best to make amends. I took a deep breath, willing myself to believe her. Okay, I said finally. I believe you. She reached out and took my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. Thank you. I know this isn't easy, but I promise you, I'm committed to us. As the months passed, we continued to face new challenges. There were moments of doubt, setbacks that threatened to undo our progress. But there were also moments of connection, where we rediscovered the love that had brought us together in the first place. One of the biggest tests came when Karl reappeared. He showed up at the tennis club one day, wanting to talk to Sarah. She came home that evening, visibly shaken. "What's wrong?" I asked, immediately concerned. "Karl came by the club today," she said, her voice trembling. My heart skipped a beat. What did he want? He wanted to apologize, to explain himself. He said he missed me and wanted to see if we could start over, she said, her eyes filling with tears. I felt a surge of anger and fear. "What did you say?" I told him no. I told him that I'm committed to you and that I don't want anything to do with him, she said, her voice firm. Relief washed over me, but the fear lingered. "Do you think he'll come back?" "I don't know. But I made it clear that I'm not interested," she said, her expression resolute. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. Finally, I took her hand, needing to feel that connection. "Thank you for telling me. And thank you for choosing us," I said, my voice filled with emotion. She squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with love. "I will always choose us." As we continued our journey, the road ahead remained uncertain. But we faced it together, committed to rebuilding what had been broken. Trust was something that had to be earned day by day, moment by moment. And while the scars of the past would always be there, we learned to live with them, using them as a reminder of how far we had come. As the summer months rolled on, Sarah and I continued to rebuild the fragile bridge of our relationship. Each day was a small step forward, but the specter of her infidelity still lingered, a constant reminder of how precarious our bond was. One evening, Sarah suggested we have dinner with some friends from the tennis club. I was hesitant at first, still wary of anything related to that world, but I agreed. It was important to support her passions and to show her that I was willing to move forward. We arrived at the restaurant and were greeted warmly by the group. As we settled into our seats, I noticed Karl was conspicuously absent. Sarah had assured me that she had cut all ties with him, but his presence, or lack thereof, still made me uneasy. The dinner started pleasantly enough, with light-hearted banter and laughter. But as the evening progressed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Conversations seemed to halt abruptly when I joined, and there were stolen glances between Sarah and her friends that made me uncomfortable. Halfway through the meal, Sarah excused herself to go to the restroom. As she walked away, one of her friends, Lisa, leaned over to me. "Tom, I'm really sorry about everything that happened," she said, her voice low and sincere. I looked at her, surprised. "Thanks, Lisa. It's been tough, but we're working through it." She nodded, her eyes filled with empathy. "I just want you to know that Sarah really loves you. She's been so torn up about everything." "I appreciate that," I said, though my mind was racing with questions. Why was Lisa bringing this up now? What did she know? Sarah returned, and the conversation shifted back to more neutral topics. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and I couldn't shake it. After dinner, as we drove home, I decided to confront Sarah. "Did you know Lisa apologized to me tonight?" I asked, my voice casual but probing. She looked at me, startled. "She did? What did she say?" "She said you were really torn up about everything. It just made me wonder, is there more that I don't know?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. Sarah sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Tom, I've told you everything. There are no more secrets, I promise." I nodded, but the unease remained. The next day I called Mark and asked if we could meet. I needed his perspective, his unwavering honesty. We met at our usual spot, and I recounted the events of the previous night. Mark listened, his expression thoughtful. "Do you trust her?" he asked bluntly. "I want to, but there's always this nagging doubt," I admitted. "Then maybe it's time for another conversation, a real, honest conversation," he suggested. That evening I sat down with Sarah, determined to lay everything out on the table. "Sarah, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there anything else about your relationship with Karl that I don't know?" I asked, my voice steady but insistent. She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear and sadness. Tom, I swear, I've told you everything. I know it's hard to believe, but I'm not hiding anything. I studied her face, searching for any sign of deceit. But all I saw was the woman I loved, desperate to make things right. Okay, I said finally, I believe you. She reached out and took my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. Thank you. I know this isn't easy, but I promise you, I'm committed to us. As the weeks passed, we continued to face new challenges. There were moments of doubt, setbacks that threatened to undo our progress. But there were also moments of connection, where we rediscovered the love that had brought us together in the first place. One evening, while Sarah was at tennis practice, I received a call from an unknown number. Hesitantly, I answered. Hello? Tom, it's Karl. My heart stopped, and anger surged through me. What do you want? I know you hate me, and you have every right to. But I need to talk to you. It's about Sarah, he said, his voice filled with urgency. I don't want to hear anything you have to say, I replied, my voice cold. Please, just listen. It's important, he pleaded. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe the next day. As I walked in, I spotted him sitting at a corner table, looking nervous. What do you want? I asked, sitting down and glaring at him. Tom, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just thought you should know the truth. He began, his voice earnest. I already know the truth. You and Sarah had an affair. End of story. I said, my patience wearing thin. It's more complicated than that. Yes, we had an affair, but it wasn't just about sex. Sarah was unhappy, and I was there for her. But she ended things with me because she realized she still loved you, he explained. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, suspicious. Because I think you deserve to know everything. Sarah has been honest with you, but I felt like I needed to say my part. I regret what happened, and I'm genuinely sorry, he said, his eyes sincere. I sat back, processing his words. Part of me wanted to punch him, to vent all my anger and frustration. But another part of me appreciated his honesty, however late it came. Fine, you've said your piece. Now leave us alone, I said, standing up to leave. I will. I just hope you can find a way to move forward, he said quietly. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a strange sense of closure. Karl's words didn't change what had happened, but they did provide a different perspective. That evening, I told Sarah about the meeting. Why did you meet him? She asked, her voice filled with anxiety. I needed to hear his side of the story. He said you ended things because you realized you still loved me, I explained. She nodded, her eyes filled with tears. That's true. I was lost, but I never stopped loving you. I took her hand, feeling a mix of emotions. I believe you, Sarah, and I am willing to keep trying, as long as you are. She smiled, her relief palpable. I am. Thank you, Tom. As the weeks turned into months, we continued to rebuild our relationship. There were still moments of doubt and insecurity, but there were also moments of hope and connection. We were learning to trust each other again, one day at a time. The revelation from Karl added a strange sense of clarity to the situation. His words didn't absolve the pain, but they provided a perspective that helped me understand the complexity of Sarah's feelings. We continued our journey of rebuilding trust, but new challenges emerged, testing our commitment and resilience. One morning, as we sat together having breakfast, Sarah hesitated before speaking. Tom, there's something I need to tell you. I looked up from my coffee, my heart tightening with anxiety. What is it? She took a deep breath. I've been offered a chance to compete in a regional tennis tournament. It's a big opportunity, but it means more training and travel. I felt a mix of pride and fear. That's great news, Sarah. But are you sure you're ready for the commitment? We've been working so hard to rebuild our relationship. I know, but this is something I've worked for my whole life. I want to prove to myself that I can do it, she said, her eyes pleading for understanding. I sighed, torn between supporting her dreams and fearing the impact on our fragile progress. Okay, if this is what you want, I'll support you, but we need to make sure we don't lose sight of us in the process. She nodded, her relief evident. Thank you, Tom. I promise I'll do everything I can to balance both. As Sarah threw herself into her training, I found myself alone more often. The old fears and insecurities began to creep back in, but I tried to push them aside, reminding myself of our progress. I kept busy with work and spent time with friends, trying to fill the void left by her absence. One evening, while Sarah was at practice, I decided to clean out the attic. As I sifted through old boxes, I stumbled upon a photo album from our early years together. I sat down and flipped through the pages, memories flooding back. The smiles, the adventures, the love we shared. It all seemed so distant now. Lost in the past, I didn't hear Sarah come home. She found me sitting on the floor, surrounded by old photographs. "What are you doing up here?" she asked, her voice soft. I looked up, tears in my eyes. "Just reminiscing." She sat down beside me, her eyes scanning the photos. "We were so happy then." "Yeah, we were," I said, my voice choked with emotion. She reached out and took my hand. "We can be happy again, Tom. I believe that." I nodded, squeezing her hand. "I want to believe that too." As the tournament approached, Sarah's training intensified and our time together dwindled. I tried to be understanding, but the loneliness gnawed at me. One night, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to an empty house. The silence was deafening, amplifying my fears and doubts. I grabbed my phone and called Mark, needing someone to talk to. "Hey man, can you meet me at the bar?" I asked, my voice strained. "Of course. I'll be there in 20, he replied, his tone concerned. At the bar, I poured out my frustrations and fears. Mark listened patiently, his expression sympathetic. "It's like we're drifting apart again, and I don't know how to stop it," I said, my voice breaking. "Tom, you've been through a lot. It's normal to feel this way. But remember, Sarah is trying too. She's following her dreams, but it doesn't mean she loves you any less," Mark said, his voice reassuring. "I know, but it's hard to stay positive when I feel so alone," I admitted. "Have you talked to her about how you feel?" he asked. I shook my head. I don't want to burden her with my insecurities. "That's not a burden, Tom. It's part of being in a relationship. You need to communicate, especially now," he advised. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about Mark's words. I realized he was right. Sarah and I had made a promise to be honest with each other, and I needed to honor that. The next evening, when Sarah returned from practice, I decided to talk to her. "Sarah, can we talk?" I asked, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "Of course," she said, sitting down beside me. "I've been feeling really lonely lately. I know you're working hard for the tournament, and I support you, but I miss you." "I miss us," I said, my voice trembling. She looked at me, her eyes filled with guilt and sadness. "Tom, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize how much my training was affecting you. I should have been more considerate." "It's not just about consideration. We need to find a balance. I want you to follow your dreams, but we can't lose sight of our relationship in the process," I explained. She nodded, tears welling up. "You're right. I've been so focused on tennis that I neglected us. I promise I'll do better." We sat in silence for a while, holding each other, the weight of our words sinking in. It was a difficult conversation, but a necessary one. In the days that followed, Sarah made a conscious effort to spend more time with me. We found small ways to connect, even amid her busy training schedule. We cooked dinner together, went for walks, and talked about our hopes and fears. The night before the tournament, Sarah was a bundle of nerves. We sat on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder. "I'm so scared, Tom. What if I fail?" she whispered. "You won't. You're amazing and you've worked so hard for this. But even if things don't go as planned, I'll be here for you. We'll face it together," I said, kissing her forehead. The next day I watched from the stands as Sarah competed. She played with a determination and grace that filled me with pride. Despite the tension, I couldn't help but admire her skill and passion. After a grueling match, Sarah emerged victorious. As she accepted her trophy, her eyes found mine in the crowd, and she smiled, a mixture of triumph and love. When she came down from the podium, I enveloped her in a hug. "You did it, Sarah. I'm so proud of you." "Thank you, Tom. I couldn't have done it without your support," she said, tears of joy streaming down her face. As we walked to the car, hand in hand, I felt a renewed sense of hope. We had faced so many challenges, but we were stronger for it. The road ahead would still be difficult, but we were committed to facing it together. The euphoria of Sarah's victory lingered in the air as we settled back into our routine. Her success in the tournament brought her new opportunities and recognition, and while I was proud of her achievements, the demands on her time grew. Balancing her career and our relationship became increasingly difficult, and the strain began to show. One evening, Sarah came home later than usual, looking exhausted. She dropped her bag by the door and collapsed onto the couch, rubbing her temples. "Tough day?" I asked, sitting down beside her. "Yeah, the new training schedule is brutal. My coach wants me to enter another tournament next month," she said, her voice weary. I sighed, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Do you think this is sustainable, Sarah? You're pushing yourself so hard." "I know, but this is my chance, Tom. I can't let it slip away," she said, her eyes pleading for understanding. I nodded, forcing a smile. "I understand. Just make sure you take care of yourself, too." As the weeks passed, our time together dwindled further. Sarah's training consumed her, and I found myself increasingly alone. The loneliness gnawed at me, and the unresolved wounds from her infidelity resurfaced, exacerbating my insecurities. One Saturday, while Sarah was at practice, I decided to visit Mark. I needed someone to talk to, someone who understood what I was going through. We met at a local cafe, and as we sat down, Mark looked at me with concern. "You don't look so good, Tom. What's going on?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "It's Sarah. Her training is taking up all her time, and I feel like I'm losing her again." Mark nodded, his expression sympathetic. "I get it. But have you talked to her about how you're feeling?" "I have, but it doesn't seem to change anything. She's so focused on her career," I said, frustration evident in my voice. "Tom, you need to make her understand how serious this is. You can't keep going like this," he advised. That night, when Sarah returned home, I decided to have another conversation. I couldn't keep bottling up my feelings. "Sarah, we need to talk," I said, my voice firm. She looked at me, surprised. "What is it? I can't keep living like this. You're always at practice, and I feel like I'm on the sidelines of your life. I supported you through the tournament, but this can't be our new normal," I said, my frustration boiling over. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I know it's been hard, but this is important to me, Tom. I thought you understood." "I do understand. But we need to find a balance. We can't keep putting our relationship on hold," I said, my voice breaking. She looked at me, tears welling up. "I don't want to lose you, Tom, but I can't give up on my dreams either." "Then we need to figure out a way to make this work. Together," I said, taking her hand. She nodded, wiping away her tears. "You're right. I'll talk to my coach and see if we can adjust the schedule. I don't want to lose us either." The next few days were tense, but Sarah made an effort to be more present. She cut back on some of her training sessions, and we found small moments to reconnect. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. However, just as things seemed to be improving, a new challenge arose. One evening, while we were having dinner, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message. She glanced at it, her face paling. "What's wrong?" I asked, immediately concerned. "It's from Karl. He's back in town and wants to meet," she said, her voice trembling. My heart sank, a wave of anger and fear washing over me. "Why would he want to meet you?" "I don't know. He said he has something important to tell me," she explained, her eyes filled with anxiety. "Are you going to meet him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated, then nodded. "I think I should. Maybe it's something we need to hear." I felt a surge of panic. "Sarah, are you sure that's a good idea, after everything that happened?" "I know it's risky, but I feel like I need to do this. For closure," she said, her voice firm. The next day, Sarah met Karl at a cafe. I spent the entire time on edge, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When she finally returned, her face was a mix of relief and sadness. "What happened?" I asked, my heart pounding. Karl apologized again. He said he wanted to make amends and that he's leaving town for good. "He just wanted to say goodbye," she explained, her eyes filled with emotion. "And do you believe him?" I asked, my voice tight. She nodded. Yes, I do. He seemed sincere. I sighed, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering doubt. I hope this is the last time we have to deal with him. It will be. I promise, she said, taking my hand. As the weeks passed, Sarah and I continued to work on our relationship. The shadow of Karl's presence faded, but the challenges of balancing her career and our marriage remained. We faced setbacks and moments of doubt, but we also found strength in our commitment to each other. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Sarah turned to me, her expression serious. Tom, I want you to know that no matter what happens, I love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this work, she said, her voice filled with determination. I looked at her, my heart swelling with emotion. I love you too, Sarah, and I'm willing to fight for us. We sat in silence, the weight of our words sinking in. It wouldn't be easy, but we were committed to facing the future together, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The following months were a whirlwind of adjustments and efforts. Sarah's career continued to flourish, but she kept her promise to balance it with our relationship. We found a rhythm that worked for us, carving out time for each other amid her demanding schedule. The shadow of Karl's presence faded into a distant memory, replaced by a renewed sense of hope and connection. However, as we approached the anniversary of the day I discovered her betrayal, the old wounds began to resurface. The memories of that painful time were hard to shake, and I found myself wrestling with doubts and fears. Sarah noticed my unease, and one evening she brought it up as we sat in the living room. Tom, you've been distant lately. Is everything okay? She asked, her eyes filled with concern. I sighed, struggling to find the right words. It's just. The anniversary of everything is coming up. It's bringing back a lot of memories. She nodded, her expression somber. I understand. That was a terrible time for both of us. I know we've come a long way, but sometimes I still struggle with the trust issue, I admitted, my voice trembling. She reached out and took my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. Tom, I love you, and I'm committed to us, but I understand that trust takes time. I'm here for you, and I'm willing to keep working on it. Her words brought a sense of comfort, but the doubts lingered. As the anniversary approached, I decided to take a step that would either make or break our progress. I suggested a weekend getaway, just the two of us, to focus on our relationship and leave the past behind. Sarah agreed, and we booked a cozy cabin in the mountains. The drive there was filled with a mix of anticipation and anxiety, both of us hoping this trip would help us move forward. When we arrived, the serene beauty of the place immediately put us at ease. The cabin was nestled among tall pines with a clear view of a tranquil lake. We spent the first day hiking and exploring, enjoying the peace and quiet. That evening, as we sat by the fireplace, Sarah took my hand and looked into my eyes. Tom, I want this weekend to be about healing. Let's leave everything behind and focus on us. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. I want that too. We spent the next day reconnecting, talking about our dreams and fears, and reminiscing about the good times we shared. The tranquility of the mountains helped us open up in ways we hadn't before, and for the first time in months, I felt a deep sense of peace. On the final evening of our trip, we sat by the lake, watching the sunset. Sarah turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. Tom, I know I've hurt you deeply, and I'm so sorry for everything. But I want you to know that I love you more than anything, and I'm committed to making this work, she said, her voice trembling. I looked at her, my heart swelling with emotion. Sarah, I love you too, and I'm willing to move forward, to build a future together. We embraced, the weight of the past lifting as we held each other. The weekend had given us the chance to heal, to rediscover the love that had brought us together in the first place. When we returned home, things felt different. The doubts and fears were still there, but they were overshadowed by a renewed sense of hope and commitment. We continued our counseling sessions, but the tone had shifted from one of repair to one of growth and strengthening. A few weeks later, Sarah had another tournament, and I was there to support her. As I watched her play, I felt a deep sense of pride and love. She was pursuing her dreams, and we were finding a way to make it work. After the match, she ran over to me, her face glowing with happiness. We did it, Tom. We found our way back. I smiled, pulling her into a tight embrace. Yes, we did, and we'll keep finding our way, no matter what. The journey of rebuilding our relationship had been long and difficult, filled with moments of doubt and pain. But it had also been a journey of rediscovery, of finding strength in each other and in ourselves. Trust was not something that could be easily repaired, but with time, effort, and love, we were slowly mending the fractures. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I turned to Sarah and took her hand. Sarah, I want us to renew our vows, to start fresh and commit to each other all over again. Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. I would love that, Tom, more than anything. We began planning a small, intimate ceremony with close friends and family. It was a chance to celebrate our journey, our love, and our commitment to each other. On the day of the ceremony, as we stood before our loved ones, I looked into Sarah's eyes and saw the woman I had fallen in love with so many years ago. We exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other, to be honest and faithful, and to always fight for our relationship. As we kissed, sealing our renewed commitment, I felt a deep sense of peace and happiness. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but we were stronger and more united than ever.